Good evening. This is Forum Daily for Tuesday, December 31st. I'm Julie Stoutland filling in for Teresa Skubik. The Angus Reid Polling Company has released a new poll showing that the federal Liberals are continuing to slide in the polls. The poll shows that the federal Liberals only have 16% support currently among Canadians based on their vote intention, with the Conservatives at 45%. The NDP are now in second place nationwide with 21% support. The Angus Reid poll also highlighted that the drop in support puts the Liberals on path for their worst electoral performance in the party's 157-year history, worse than the 2011 election, where the party was polling at 17%. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc says the Liberal government plans to extend the deadline for claiming charitable donations on tax returns through to the end of February. His office says that this will help ease the effects on the month-long Canada Post strike that halted deliveries during a busy time of year. The announcement comes nearly a week after Canada's premiers called on Justin Trudeau's government to make the move. It remains to be seen if it will actually happen, because it's still unclear how long the Liberal minority government will continue to have the confidence of the House. Israel says that it arrested 25,000 Palestinians in Gaza in the past year. Israel's security service says that 650 of those were interrogated, noting the interrogations enabled Israel to retrieve 9 bodies of hostages who were kidnapped last year on October 7th. This summer, the UN Human Rights Office issued a report saying Palestinians detained by Israeli authorities since the October Hamas attack faced waterboarding, sleep deprivation, electric shocks, dogs set on them, and other forms of torture and mistreatment. Israel's prison authorities have said that all Palestinian prisoners are treated according to Israeli and international law. Russia launched an aerial attack on Ukraine overnight, striking the capital and other regions with multiple missiles and drones. Minutes after Ukraine's Air Force reported a ballistic missile threat early today, at least 2 explosions were heard in the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry claims its air defenses shot down 68 Ukrainian drones over several regions. Ukraine's military intelligence directorate claims that one of its naval drones shot down a Russian helicopter with a missile today. President Joe Biden has agreed to send $2.5 billion of weapons from the United States to Ukraine as his administration works quickly to spend all the money it has before Donald Trump takes office. The new spending package includes $1.25 billion of presidential drawdown authority, allowing the military to pull existing stock from its shelves and get weapons to the battlefield faster. The new military aid comes as Russia has launched a barrage of attacks against Ukraine's power facilities. The Taliban say that they will close all national and foreign non-governmental groups employing Afghan women, the latest crackdown on women's rights since they took power in August 2021. It comes 2 years after they told NGOs to suspend the employment of Afghan women, allegedly because they didn't wear the Islamic headscarf correctly. In a letter published on X on Sunday night, the economy ministry said failure to comply with the latest order will mean NGOs losing their license to operate in Afghanistan. If NGOs do not cooperate, their activities will also be canceled. Canada's Transportation Safety Board is conducting a technical examination of a plane that came down hard on the tarmac at Halifax Stanfield International Airport on Saturday night. The agency is also investigating whether some debris found on a runway at St. John's International Airport is connected to the plane fire in Halifax. The Air Canada Express flight from St. John's to Halifax experienced a rough landing, with Air Canada blaming the sparks, flames, and smoke on a suspected landing gear issue. Funeral services honoring former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who died Sunday at 100 years old, will be held in Georgia and Washington, D.C., beginning on Saturday and concluding next Thursday. The state funeral schedule includes a service at the Carter Presidential Center in Atlanta, public viewings in Atlanta and Washington, a service at the U.S. Capitol, a national funeral at Washington National Cathedral, and a private service and interment at the Carter home in Plains, Georgia. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
One of the toughest and most uncomfortable headlines of 2024 was the murder trial of now convicted serial killer Jeremy Skibicki. Jeremy Skibicki was handed 4 concurrent life sentences for the first-degree murder of 4 Indigenous women, and he must serve 25 years before he's eligible for parole. The judge in the trial said that he was bound by law to impose the automatic sentence, adding that the women's families deserve more than what could be accomplished in a courtroom. The bodies of 2 of those women, whom are suspected to be in a Winnipeg landfill, are now being searched for after Premier Wab Kinew authorized the search. Joining me now to discuss the case and the search for those two women killed by Jeremy Skibicki is Timur Durrani, national reporter for the Globe and Mail. Timur, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So with the search underway, of course, families never get back what they've lost. But how important is it? And I ask this because I know that you were both in the courtroom and you've spoken closely with the families of the victims. How important is this search from the perspective of closure?
Yeah, it's everything, right? From the beginning, that was really what the families wanted. They wanted form of closure through justice, and justice for them meant getting a dignified funeral for as many of the women in this case as possible. I mean, there's 4 victims that we know of, and that's what this case is about. Mm-hmm. One of those women, we still don't know her identity. Police have not been able to find out what her name is even, the whereabouts of her remains, and she's the first victim, actually, in fact, according to the trial and what we found out through Jeremy Skibicki himself. Her name has been, she's been named Buffalo Woman to give her that dignity. So dignity is really what this is all about, and it's what it's been from the beginning. The women's families want a funeral. They would like that to happen. And so for that reason, now we're at this point, past the trial where Jeremy Skibicki has been found guilty. He's been sentenced to life, 4 consecutive life sentences, which is what the judge thought, as you just explained, is the highest limit that you can impose on him here in Canada. At this point, now we're at a stage of the search, which we just reported earlier this month here at the Globe. The province's premier has told us that we're now at the most critical stage of it. So this is the point where they've done all the, building of different constructions around the actual landfill. It's massive. I've been there myself. There's a massive search facility that's been built. It's like a kind of like a conveyor belt sort of a situation. But what they do is they have to do it by hand. And so they have to go inside at a very specific location that's many, many feet below the ground. That's what they're doing at this point. So they've mapped it out. They know exactly where these remains are, and that's what they're going to do there. They've also started finding remains there of, different newspaper articles and receipts that are legible, so they know that it's a date to 2022 when these women were murdered, which is what they're looking for. Specifically that day when that garbage was collected, where their remains were, and how they can find those body parts there to, again, give a dignified funeral. It's important to clarify here that they're looking specifically for just 2 women, and it's not any more at this point that they are aware of there, but more could be found there. One of those women, of course, was already found by Winnipeg Police Service in 2022, Rebecca Contois. However, the Mercedes Meyer and Buffalo Woman and Morgan Harris have not been found.
And do we have an estimate on time frame of how long it may take to actually give the families that dignified funeral that they're looking for and find those 2 women?
Yeah, right now, this has been a multi-year process for sure. So we're looking at, when we've asked the premier, this might be the longest stage of that process. So, of course, they've taken their time to build many different constructions there. So that's taken really all of this year. At this point, this is the stage that they're going to go very slow at. There might be months. They're looking at, well into 2025 towards the end of it, maybe even into 2026 if need be, in order to go down there and really find these remains and be very specific about it. Again, they don't want to disrupt the process. They don't want to go in too hard at it. That's why they're going by hand, really. really to search through the remains in order not to, to defeat the purpose, which is that they want to find these remains intact if possible, because that is a possibility here.
Yeah, of course, of course. I want to talk to you about the specifics of the trial and Skibicki's defense and how he essentially changed the legal strategy for Skibicki's team changed. We do have to go to commercial break, so we're going to pick back up in just a minute here when we come back from the break. And just look, I would love for you to explain or walk us through the claiming to be mentally ill and not being able to be found guilty and the ultimate result of the trial. So we'll be right back with Timur Durrani right after this quick commercial. We're back with Timur Durrani from the Globe and Mail. Can you walk us through what Mr. Skibicki's defense was and how it changed over the course of the trial?
Right. It's changed a lot. I mean, it's a 2-year long process, right? He was arrested in 2022, just the next day after the last of his 4 murders. And the way it went about from that point on was that at first he had claimed he was not guilty. And so that's really what the strategy was. For 2 years, he had claimed he was not guilty of any of these 4 first-degree murders. The Crown had constantly said that this is a first-degree murder. From the get-go, that is what they were pursuing it as. The defense strategy, however, flipped at the beginning of this trial this year, which is where it concluded, and it went on for months this year, right? And at that point, it was a strategy that became something called the not criminally responsible defense, which here in Canada is our version of what's called the insanity plea.
Yep.
And the way it goes about it is that you are not criminally responsible. You may have committed the act, but you have to reach this very high bar to prove to the court that you are, in fact, not criminally responsible for the acts that you are being accused of doing, that you could not be possibly, your brain could not possibly be able to comprehend the guilt of committing those acts. And so thereby the court needs to find you in a very interesting way guilty of the act, but not guilty of being able to understand the act to the degree of the law. So, first-degree murder might not be the degree you get by the end of it. Of course, this was the strategy that they came about at the beginning of the trial, at the eve of the trial. By that point, they had been constantly arguing not to have a jury and to go for a judge-alone trial. That's what the defense was arguing. But one day, literally before a jury was supposed to be convened and it was already established, everything was going to happen, that's when he said, his lawyer said that he is now not criminally responsible. And so the Crown, which had been wanting a jury this whole time, completely flipped and then decided to say, now we do want a judge-alone trial as well. So this trial was all seen before a judge because of this flip in the script. By the end of a months-long trial, however, the judge found that he was in fact guilty on all counts, that he was, he was not criminally responsible NCR, which again is a very high bar in Canada. Statistics Canada stats that we've compiled here at the Globe have shown that it is a 0.0005% chance for you to be, found NCR here. It's a very, very, very low, low barometer for you to get to that point. It's a very difficult case to present. And the judge found that that was not the case here.
Okay. And I mean, thinking bigger picture, I mean, this case was a national headline for months, if not the year, going back actually into previous years. It overlays into the ongoing concern of missing and murdered Indigenous women. What steps are needed to be taken to prevent cases like this from happening where they're clearly targeted? What can be done, or what is being discussed to be done?
I mean, this case was really at the heart of last year's provincial election here in Manitoba. In fact, actually, most people voted based on this. This is what became the crux of that election, where Mr. Canoe, Wab Canoe, he was elected as premier. There was a government, the Progressive Conservative government, which was arguing that they do not want to find the remains of these women that are out there in these landfills because it was too unsafe and it was too costly. That was their measure. In fact, there were, billboards all around the province, all around the the city. It became a big national moment for that reason because an election was being sought about, really the province deciding what's the right steps that the province wants to take, whether that is looking for these women or not, and that's the
Yeah.
government you'll elect, the current one that was in charge at the time, or do you want a new government that is going to go out looking for them? That's why it's a national headline. It's been that way because it was a political situation. These
Hmm.
women's families were put through this political ringer. And so when Mr. Canoe was elected, there was a lot of eyes on him, mine included. I became our Manitoba Bureau Chief for that reason. We started
Yeah.
looking into this case for that reason because a lot of the country wanted to see what he was going to do here. And he has met that promise. He's in
Yeah.
fact continued it throughout the trial. And at this point, this search is ongoing for that reason. At this point, we are at a juncture now where fulfillments need to happen, right? And so that's why this became such a big headline.
Yeah.
We're at that point where we're now trying to see if these women's remains will be found, what will that look like? And that's where we're at. So that's still a long process. How it became a critical point is because of what's happened across this country with Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people
Of
for
course.
generations, right? And
Yeah.
that's where we're at. We're kind of looking at a point where this case became representative of that crisis.
Timur, I really appreciate you taking the time and your coverage on this story as it developed throughout the year, and appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
Manitoba's premier is leaving the door open to new financial support for people affected by U.S. trade policies and businesses hit by property tax increases. While Canoe says his NDP government is willing to consider financial aid if incoming U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on a threat to impose tariffs on Canadian goods over border concerns. He says that the impact of tariffs could be severe, and some range of affordability measures would help people through economic uncertainty. A new EY survey finds that fewer drivers are interested in buying an electric vehicle as their next car. The new report shows that intentions among respondents to buy a fully electric vehicle within the next 2 years has fallen, with Canadian EV purchase intent dropping nearly 10% below global average. We were joined earlier by Jennifer Rogers, EY Canada's national automotive and transportation leader, to unpack the report and what needs to be done to increase the sale of electric vehicles.
So our report actually measures the car buying intent of individuals in Canada. Firstly, those that are interested in purchasing a car over the next 2 years, that had actually increased from 42 to 48%. But then of those looking to purchase a vehicle, we did see a slight decrease from 52% of those looking to purchase a vehicle that would pick an electric vehicle, including plug-in hybrids, etc. That dropped from 52% last year down to 50% this year. And so, some of what consumers are highlighting as what they feel are impediments to moving to an electric vehicle are things like the range of the vehicle, upfront cost, as well as charging infrastructure. Those are sort of the main factors that they had cited. So I do think there's a bit of education that's required for our consumers. Just, the range of vehicles, although that still factors as something that's a bit of a detractor for people looking to purchase a vehicle, it certainly has declined compared to where it was in a few years ago. And so, the range of vehicles has improved over the last few years. And so I do think that, consumers need to be better educated about what that ownership of an electric vehicle and that experience would look like. In addition to that, when you think of things like charging infrastructure, many people charge their vehicles at home. And so when you look at individuals that already own an electric vehicle and might be looking to purchase their next car, a significantly high percentage of those individuals would select an electric car as their second vehicle. And so I think it shows that, with the experience of being an owner of an electric vehicle, people recognize that there are benefits, whether it's overall cost of ownership or things like the limited range and charging infrastructure are less of a factor in how people actually use their vehicle on a day-to-day basis. I mean, obviously, one of the main motivators for people moving to an electric vehicle is actually environmental reasons. So we see that as the second highest reason for people to select an electric vehicle, with 34% of individuals citing that as one of the main motivators. In addition to that, the other motivator is obviously that high cost of fuel at the moment, and so looking at its electric vehicle as from an overall operating cost perspective as being more beneficial. So I think there are positives from that perspective. In terms of more general, from an environment perspective, I think there's elements that, um, looking back into the entire supply chain behind electric vehicles, obviously in Canada, we do have a lot of clean energy that we use in order to, charge as part of our current grid. A lot of it is through clean energy. And so I think there would be positives from that perspective, from an environmental standpoint.
The crystal covered ball that traditionally drops in Times Square to ring in the new year got its test run on Monday in New York City. Officials say the geodesic sphere, which weighs almost 6 tons and features more than 2,600 crystal triangles, successfully ran up and down a 42-meter pole atop the One Times Square skyscraper. About 1,300 kilograms of brightly colored confetti will also fill the air at midnight tonight. And there's a chance of seeing the beautiful northern lights in some parts of Canada tonight. Viewers in parts of coastal British Columbia and the southern interior may have a chance to spot the northern lights, as well as those in southwestern Ontario and the southwestern Maritimes, particularly in the early morning hours. Two obstacles that could impact the visibility of the lights are weather, as cloud cover is expected for many parts of the country tonight, and the requirement of darkness, meaning that the lights won't be visible for major cities. I'm Julie Stoutland, filling in for Teresa Skubik. Happy New Year, everyone.